Well, howdy there, stranger. I'm Jordy.
And I'm Brad.
And welcome back to Beers with Queers, the true crime podcast where I research a case and Brad here, and potentially you guys,
don't know a damn thing about it.
So for today's case, it's going to be a little different than what we normally talk about. There's not really a murder per se, and police aren't sure what happened is exactly a crime, since it did seem that the victim was willing to go through with it, although what he went through was illegal. But even still, so many questions and mysteries remain surrounding the tragic and equally bizarre death of a man named Jack Chapman. Now, some of our listeners may actually already know who this is, and the story surrounding him, since it sent shockwaves through the body modification and bear scenes across the country, and just the queer community as a whole, since Jack and his polycule family of bears were very active and well known in the community, especially online. And also, just in case, for anyone who doesn't know what a bear is, it's basically what you call a very hairy, usually bigger gay man.
I'm a bear.
So yes, prime example, Brad is a bear. I would be considered an otter. And honestly, we might have to do a whole mini episode where we just talk about the different subcategories of gay classification as animals. Because there's a lot, surprisingly, and it's actually kind of fascinating.
I mean, you said what a bear was, so go ahead and say what an otter is.
An otter is the evolution. It's like if you think of it like a Pokemon line evolution, it goes twink, which is a skinnier, hairless gay man, to an otter, which is a kind of in between, a little bit more muscle on him and a little bit more hair. And it finally evolves into a bear, which is a little bit muscular and hairy, lots of hair. And so, yeah, I am the middle evolution. Brad is the final evolution of this gay Pokemon evolution line.
And that's not even getting into wolves and polar bears and all the other stuff, so yeah, probably would use its own episode, but it would have to be some kind of crime. And there's no crime of being a bear.
There isn't. And also thinking of it more, we're more like an Eevee line, like an evolution. So it's one starter Pokemon, and then depending on what stone you give it, it evolves into the different subcategory.
Or how much food you give it.
Or how much food you give it and how often it shaves, honestly.
Because I like to eat and I don't like to shave.
So yeah, that's our little break from the weirdness of this episode, because this is going to be a really sad and tragic one, but also a fascinating one at the same time, since it really does cast a light on a community that honestly doesn't really get talked about and that a lot of people probably don't even know exist, and that is the community of silicone enthusiasts, but more specifically, the genital enlargement community. So this is going to be a very different beast compared to what we normally cover. And of course, before we get into anything, I do want to make it clear we are not judging or trying to make fun of or spread hate towards people who are involved with these fetishes and communities. I don't personally understand the silicone enthusiasts, and I do think it is illegal for a reason, which we will touch upon. But that's not why we're here. We're here to talk about a young man whose life was tragically cut short and the strange circumstances surrounding his life that eventually led to his death. We also will be talking about different aspects of these communities to get a better understanding of what it was like we're discussing, but we're going to try to tread lightly and be respectful as much as we possibly can.
There's no kink shaming here.
Absolutely no kink shaming unless it is something disturbing. So all that to say,
I should say something illegal.
Illegal and disturbing, yeah.
That hurts someone.
As long as it, there's a saying my stepmother uses a lot, and I've actually adopted it myself. And that is, whatever floats your boat, as long as it doesn't sink mine. And I think that is honestly something we can all live by. So with that, let's jump right into it. So at the time of his death, in October of 2018, Jack was going by the name Tank Heathcliff Heffertepen, Whether he legally changed his name or not, I couldn't really find, but that was what he was going by in his final years. However, for the first 21 years of his life, he was born and raised as Jack Andrew Chapman, and he was born on February 13th, 1990 in Australia to his mother Linda Chapman, who described her son as being a gentle giant. He graduated from La Trobe University with a bachelor's in arts and social research in 2012, and according to a Facebook post written by a close friend of Jack's named Chuck Osborne, he was the kindest, gentlest soul I have ever met. His heart was filled with pure love, which he showered on everyone around him. His enthusiasm for just about everything and the relationships that meant so much to him were endless. His life was worth living, which makes its sudden end so much more tragic. As I'm sure anyone who reads this will agree, knowing him made you a better person. Now, Chuck posted this the day after Jack's death, something that shocked everyone, especially Jack's mom and brother back home in Australia, since at this time, Jack was living halfway across the world in Washington State. Now, further in his post, Chuck went on to elaborate about a few details surrounding Jack's sudden death, stating, Tank had a persistent cough for several months. Otherwise, he seemed fine, doing the things he loved, working out, caring for his clients as part of Lifelong AIDS Alliance, and spending time with his family. Until a week ago when he had trouble breathing and was admitted to the hospital with what we figured was a routine infection. It turned out to be much more. He fought very hard, seeming to get a little bit better day by day, until the terrible moment when we were told nothing more could be done. In lieu of flowers, Tank's wishes are that you consider making a donation to Lifelong AIDS Alliance, a nonprofit Washington organization that provides food, housing, and health services to clients living with serious illnesses, including AIDS and HIV. He loved his time there, and we hope his legacy with Lifelong lasts indefinitely. Tank requests that his remains be cremated and that no public memorial service be held. Now, of course, this is heartbreaking news, and it was met with an outpouring of support and sadness over the sudden loss of Jack, but the next big question soon became, how did he die? Because by all accounts, Jack was a healthy and active 28-year-old man with no signs of any pre-existing conditions according to his mother. Following Jack's post announcing Jack's death, Jack's main partner at the time and the person whom he called his master, 31-year-old Dylan Haffertepen, made an official post on his blog entitled Noodles and Beef, announcing Jack's death to his near 3 million readers, stating, Tank left a very detailed will I'm determined to fulfill. I see the butterfly effect Tank had on the world, and I miss him incredibly. He imprinted on those closest to him, and when we're together, he's there. Dylan also stated that Tank, or Jack, passed away from an quote-unquote undiagnosed lung condition, something that didn't really make sense to his mother, as Jack had made no previous mention of having any issues with his lungs, and the two were very close, so it was obviously something that he would have brought up to her. Now, due to the popularity of Dylan and Jack's lives on social media and their massive followings, rumors quickly began to spread about the circumstances surrounding Jack's sudden death, and pretty soon, just days after he died, Jack's official autopsy was somehow leaked to the public, and with it, more questions than answers arose. So Jack's official cause of death was listed on his autopsy report as being a mixture of acute respiratory distress syndrome, a pulmonary embolism, and most strange of all, silicone injection syndrome. Now, the mention of silicone on his autopsy report made Linda Chapman's heart sink as she began to realize what truly happened. Jack's sudden death was directly related to his frequent injections of free-floating silicone into his scrotum, which he had been doing for several years by the time of his death. Over the course of about 4 years, Jack had been receiving multiple injections of silicone into his testicles to enlarge them to a shocking size. Now, his journey is documented every step of the way by the blogs he shared with his master, Dylan Haffertepen, and in one such photo taken not long before his death, Jack can be seen sitting on a ledge in nothing but basketball shorts and his enormous testicles poking out of his shorts. And now, of course, I cannot show you this on our social media because it does contain nudity, but it is easily findable if you guys look for it and want to see it. However, Brad, I'm going to show you the photo, and I'm going to let you tell me what you think.
Oh, wow. Like, that seems like that would be very, very uncomfortable to carry around. And this is a big dude. Like, I mean, he literally looks like a frost giant or something out of Dungeons and Dragons. Like, six-pack, beefy guy, big red beard, and giant. And I mean, giant testicles.
So in the photo I just showed Brad, it is Jack, and at this point his testicles were about the size of dodgeballs, and he was packing that around in his shorts. Now, although Jack seems to be happy and very much willing to take part in these extreme body modifications, his mother, as well as many of his friends, believe that Jack was forced to do so all by his partner Dylan, and that he himself wanted no part of it. Now, of course, that is all speculation. There is no way to actually prove that.
That's just their side of the story.
That is their side of the story, and he does seem happy and willing in all the photos, so, of course, making no accusations. But it does look extreme. Like, if you didn't know the fetish that he was a part of, it would look, honestly, horrific to some people. They'd be like, you need to get that checked out. That looks like it hurts.
Honestly, I look at it and I'm like, I'm like, sometimes normal-sized testicles get in your way when you're working out and they hurt. Like, I don't know if anybody's ever tried to do a jumping jack without, like, underwear on, but, like, this would actually, like, I'm afraid, like, that would, like, rip something out of, like, my abdomen or something like that.
Yeah, it is. When I say extreme, I am not exaggerating when I say he is literally carrying around combined almost the size of a basketball in his shorts.
I wonder how much that weighs. Like, I know silicone,
it hardens when liquid silicone. I actually touch on that a little later, but it does harden when you inject it. So that is solid. So it is, we'll get into it a little bit more later, but it is a shocking image for a lot of his friends, and especially his mother, who weren't as familiar with the gay scenes he ran in. However, even if he wanted to, Jack couldn't say no because he was in a very dominating relationship with Dylan, and the two had about as extreme of a master-slave relationship as you can imagine, which led to Jack's mother, as well as many others, accusing Dylan of being directly responsible for Jack's death. So this is a very complicated and honestly the fascinating dynamic that we're about to discuss. So I'm going to try and go through it as best as I can. But again, before we go any further, I should point out that as of 2024, no one has been arrested or charged in connection with Jack's death, and his case is not technically considered a crime. So everything I am saying is in no way accusing anyone of anything or trying to spread lies about anyone. Everything in this episode is either direct quotes from specific people or evidence, quote-unquote evidence, that is readily available online for anyone to find. So just throwing that out there because I don't want to get sued. So with that, let's start from the beginning. So Dylan Haffertepen, or as he's better known online as Noodles and Beef, was born on April 24th, 1987 in Santa Cruz, California, and he really began to appear in the online gay scene around 2006. Dylan was extremely open with his bodily transformation and struggles with body dysmorphia, telling an interviewer in 2011 that he always just felt small. Standing at 5'8", he explained how he not only always fell short, but also weak and skinny, and that he felt, quote-unquote, completely undesirable. He soon became obsessed with getting as big as he possibly could to help him cure these feelings he was feeling. And starting in 2006, Dylan began posting photos of his transformation. Gradually, over the course of about 7 years, Dylan's pecs, arms, cheeks, and pretty much every other part of his body started to get bigger and bigger, and by 2013, he had achieved his goal of becoming a muscle bear. and started getting extensive tattoo work all over his body and began to amass his huge following in the online gay community. In 2016, Dylan was actually featured and interviewed by ABC News for a story entitled Bigorexia, When the Obsessive Desire for Bigger Muscles is a Dangerous Medical Condition for Some Men. In the article, Dylan was open about how at 18, he only weighed 140 pounds, and every time he would look at bodybuilders, he would wish he looked like them. Over the next 7 years, he achieved his dream of growing big by, in his own words, following intense workout routines, drinking 6 protein shakes a day, and spending half of his paycheck on supplements, eventually ending up weighing 265 pounds and sporting 20-inch biceps. So he is a big boy. Now, he went on to state in the article, I would get very upset about how small my arms seemed to be in proportion to my waist. I would focus on all these things that made me upset. However, the article also mentioned the repercussions that came with wanting to be this huge. Dylan actually ended up in the hospital several times due to the fact his muscles were so big that his blood pressure became too high and his heart had to actually be shocked back to normal. Dylan waved off all these concerns, stating, I had negotiated with myself that it would be okay to succumb to death at an early age by pushing myself beyond what my body is capable of. The article went on to explain that Dylan suffered from a psychological condition called muscle dysmorphia that causes people to believe that their body or muscles are too small or scrawny and that they need to constantly be gaining muscle to make up for this. This condition is called the reverse anorexia and is most common in men. In another interview, Dylan stated that he had 3 different gym memberships at any given time and that he spent over $200 a week for a week's worth of protein powder, with his clothes having to be custom made since an XXL would no longer fit him. So for a time, Dylan maintained a positive online presence and quickly amassed a huge following, with his Instagram account attracting over 64,000 followers, and like I said earlier, his Tumblr blog amassing 3 million readers. He became somewhat of a minor celebrity in the gay community, often attending all the best gay and bear events across the country, which he stated was a bit of a challenge since he was so big that he could barely squeeze into a normal airplane seat. And now, although people were concerned with his seemingly excessive workout regime, it was his choice and it was what made him happy, and he did seem to be doing great at managing his health. Following his health scare, seemed to be kind of finding a good balance there. And so he would often begin posting workout tips and programs for his followers to follow along with on his blog, and he became a pretty beloved member of the bear community. And he was even, I think he's featured in one of those episodes of that show Where the Bears Are. It's a gay show on Tubi. If you've never seen it, we were watching the first episode a few months ago, but he is actually in a future episode. So, like I said, that if he's in TV shows, he's interviewed with ABC News, so he is starting to gain a little bit of a celebrity status.
That's more than a little bit of celebrity status. I mean, that many readers on Tumblr that's a lot of readers.
Yeah, and so like I said, he was becoming one of the leading voices of the community. And one of his top readers of that blog was Jack Chapman, who was still living in Melbourne, Australia at this time. Now, Jack loved Dylan's blog and often followed his workout routines to help gain more muscle. Jack would later state during an interview that he and Dylan first met on OkCupid about a year before meeting in person in 2012. They carried on an online relationship during this time and grew closer as a couple. Jack traveled to America on a 5-day vacation during Valentine's Day 2012 in order to spend it with Dylan and meet him in person. It was during this visit that Dylan began to introduce Jack to the world of puppy play, as well as master-slave domination relationships, all of which Jack stated made him very aroused and excited. It was during this trip that Dylan also gifted Jack with his first puppy collar, and when asked by an interviewer what made it so exciting, Jack stated, "I don't think on a conscious level I really understood what it meant. I think that he was acting quite dominant and forceful towards me. The collar itself represented ownership and being owned, which turned me on." Now, following his trip to America, Jack returned to Australia and continued his relationship with Dylan online, and it's during this time the two wrote up a quote-unquote contract for Jack to sign, giving ownership of himself to Dylan. Now, Jack actually posted an official copy of his contract with Dylan on December 20th, 2012, and in it, it states that the slave, aka Jack, must get a large tattoo that states property of Master Dylan, and a pup will identify as any name his master bestows upon him. The pup will be encouraged to change his name legally. Master's word is law and must be obeyed. Master's word should override a pup's internal reality and be accepted as absolute truth. The contract goes on to state that Jack is forbidden from wearing deodorant, masturbating, watching TV, and forbids him from speaking unless spoken to by Master. It also states that Jack is to grovel, kiss, and cry at Dylan's feet every time they meet until he is given permission to stand, and that he is to relinquish all of his financial assets to Master and cannot spend money without Master's permission. He is to have no contact with anyone unless given permission by the Master, and a pup is to be completely and totally dependent on his master. The contract goes on even further to state, a pup has no sense of value outside of what is given to him by his master. When a pup does wrong or finds fault in himself, he is to dwell upon it internally until he finds the best way to improve himself for his master. But now the part of the contract, because it goes on even further, the part of the contract that most sticks out to Jack's friends and family states, Master has explicit body goals for his pup regarding their weight, their muscle mass, their measurements, and proportions. The pup will make all efforts to make sure these goals are realized and should never feel satisfied until his master is satisfied. There is always additional room for a pup to push his limits. From that point on, Jack was to be known as Pup Tank, and he was a slave to Dylan. So that a bit of an extreme. But now let's pause for a moment and explain a few things here, because what I just described are legitimate forms of relationships and sexual role play, and it's found in hetero and homosexual couples. So while it may seem foreign or odd to some people who aren't into that sort of thing, this is a legitimate and most of the time mutual and healthy relationship for a lot of people. Now, I also want to explain what pups are for a second, for anyone who may not know. So, puppy play is a type of kink/fetish role play which usually involves submissive people taking on the role of a quote-unquote pup, like a puppy dog, oftentimes donning leather fetish masks that look like dog masks, and then a more dominant person taking on the role of handler. The basic gist of the fetish is that pups are able to engage in puppy play and just let go of all their human desires and worries, and during this time just completely lose themselves in the fantasy and just kind of just let loose and be like a puppy, have no worries, with the handler being there to look after them and take care of them while they do so, such as literally rolling around, playing with toys, barking, growling at each other. And like I said, this is a very generalized version of this fetish. It does present itself in many ways, so don't take what I say as the base fact. But it is a very popular and lively community that you may often see present at your local gay bars or pride events. If you see anyone wearing puppy masks or leather masks that look like dogs or puppies, usually they're part of the puppy play community. And it is a completely normal fetish. And this is not in any way trying to demonize or stigmatize the people who engage in it. I personally know several people who are into puppy play, and all of them are amazing. So I do encourage you, if you are not familiar with it and you want to know more about it, to look further into it and just see that it is a normal fetish for a lot of people to have. So all that to say, do not take anything I say about different kinks and fetishes in this episode as me trying to demonize it. This case is really an example of how not to do all of these kinks, since as many agreed that the master-slave relationship Dylan and Jack had was extremely toxic and not at all indicative of what a normal master-slave relationship should be. But more on that here in a bit.
One of the things that stood out to me in that contract, which a lot of it, if you're down for it, you're down for it and everything. And that's cool. But a lot of it sounded like separating yourself off from other people. And that is like a red flag in any relationship. Like if you have somebody that's like, you don't need to see other people, you don't need to see your family, you only need to see me, that's a red flag right there. And that just popped out as a red flag in that. I mean, there's a few other red flags in there for me, but yeah, that one definitely stands out as like, that's more of like a control type thing, more than just dominancy. That's like controlling a human being at that point.
It's not even a red flag at that point. It's 6 flags, like red, red, red. So, and a lot of people can voice that concern. They're like, this doesn't seem like a normal sub-dom relationship like you would normally see. It is a role play fetish where one person gives themselves over completely to the control of the dominant one and allows themselves to relinquish all control. This often involves certain speech and demanding words to make a partner submit. However, in the vast majority of cases, it is subconsciously known that all this is reserved for sexual satisfaction or erotic social context, and it's not at all to mean that you are actual someone's legitimate slave.
That's the other thing about this whole thing. It didn't sound like this is what we're going to do in the bedroom. This sounded more like this is what you are from now on. You're my slave in the bedroom and in life. And I guess, like this guy, like when you see a picture of him, he is a giant man. So having someone that's finally being dominant to him, I could see there be a draw to that. I mean, there's not many people that's going to walk up to this guy and tell him anything of what to do. So I would say that's appealing to him if that's what he wants. But this also sounds like way outside the bedroom, way outside the normal, like role play aspects of a dom-sub relationship.
And that's what a lot of people online agreed is it seems to be a little bit too extreme and borderline toxic, honestly. Now, Jack, now going by Tank, actually did post in 2015 about his feelings towards the master-slave relationship with Dylan, and he stated that at first he thought of absolute control. It made him giddy and excited, but he would later state, submission for me is about love. Submission is not at all an all-or-nothing affair. It exists on a spectrum. It requires fundamental things like trust, love, and understanding. It needs to be flexible. And that's more in line with what an actual normal, master-slave, sub-dom relationship is. Now, about a year after meeting in person for the first time and signing the contract, Jack would move to Washington State to be with Dylan and live with him as one of his pups. And I say one of because Dylan was also polyamorous, and he had at least 3 other pups living with him at this time. And this was a known fact by Jack. He was completely fine with it. He loved it. So that's not like a red flag. That's just me stating the environment he was in. Now, Jack was given a chain with a collar attached to it with his name Pup Tank across it, and it was padlocked in place with only Dylan having the key to take it off. He got the tattoo, Property of Master Dylan, across his back, and he was now officially a part of Dylan's happy poly pup family. However, many people online and in real life are very afraid for Jack as they all believe the contract he signed with Dylan to be abusive. This is the point that online support towards Dylan began to sour as many in the Dom sub community were becoming angry and honestly afraid that due to Dylan's massive online following, people would look at his relationship with Jack as being a quote-unquote normal Dom sub relationship when it wasn't. One example of what many believe to be a toxic and abusive behavior from Dylan towards Jack was a Tumblr post Jack made on his blog in which he posted a photo of himself with tear-filled eyes and went on to state, "I am shit. I am a shit person. I do horrible and inexcusable things. I am dishonest and deceitful. I am a coward and I am stupid. I hurt my master. I don't deserve love. I don't deserve forgiveness. I only deserve to suffer. Jack explained the reason he was made to post this by Dylan was due to getting into a hot tub with a longtime friend of his without getting Dylan's permission first. Now, this post was shared all around the fetish and bear circles, with many telling Jack he didn't need to be sorry and that Dylan shouldn't be making him feel bad for this. And so that was another thing too, is allegedly, a lot of people were thinking that Dylan made him post this to try to humiliate him, but then it backfired and people were getting angry at Dylan. It was also around this time that Jack began to document his journey with silicone injections into his genitals, posting updates of new photos of him and Dylan or photos in tight underwear and spandex, and just showing off the extensive size of his testicles. And I'll have a few photos on our social medias of them in their underwear, more covered photos. But y'all, when I say massive, I'm massive. And now it should be noted that this is a version of another fetish, which is extreme body modification. Many men in these circles get off on feeling and seeing men with enlarged scrotums, seeing it as a sign of potency. This includes rubbing it, squeezing it, feeling it slap against their bodies, and using the enlarged scrotum for sexual gratification. Now, most of these injections are from back alley doctors, as such injections are illegal and not approved by the FDA. Now, let's talk a little bit about the trend and how this all got started. So the trend of illegal silicone injections has been around since at least World War II, and it initially served as a way for trans women to enhance their features, such as injecting it into their breasts and their butts. The process works by injecting liquid silicone into the desired area, which causes the body to surround it with collagen and create a solid and permanent look, resulting in rounder and usually smoother appearances from the injected area. Now, it should be noted that this is an extremely dangerous act to do, as the risk and effect from receiving these injections from an unlicensed doctor can be fatal. The silicone can harden into painful masses, the injected area can become infected and rot the skin away from the area, and most of all, loose silicone has the potential of entering the bloodstream, causing artery blockage and leading to immediate death, or in some cases can take almost 20 years to eventually kill you. So that's, and like I said, how it works, liquid, inject it into the area, and then your body kind of attacks it almost, and it hardens, so it gets rock solid. Now, over the years, countless trans women have lost their lives due to back alley silicone injections, and for a time it was almost an epidemic all the way up until the 80s. However, in the years since then, these illegal injections have grown more and more popular amongst gay men who use it to enhance their own genitals. Now, due to the inherent risks and just how illegal it is, Tank refused to discuss who actually gave him the injections, only stating on his blog, "It was a guy from Sacramento. I will not refer any readers to any resources. If you seek to pursue it, you're doing so at your own risk." So he also seemed to be very aware of the potential consequences of receiving these injections. He also refused to state how he found the guy in the first place, although his mother and his friends believe he found the man through Dylan and was encouraged to get the injections by him in the first place, allegedly.
But they would say that. I mean, Dylan is going to be the bad guy in this story with his parents, allegedly or not, what he did.
That is true. And at first, definitely you can see where it's like, okay, I mean, he may have, but Jack's a big boy. He is very much aware, as he's posted before. However, that starts to be a little bit more of a teeter-totter when you realize that Jack's death isn't the first death that Dylan is associated with.
Okay, keep reading. You're going to convince me.
So the reason people believe Dylan is the one who got Jack in touch with the illegal silicone injectionist is due to a striking similarity in a previous case of a member of the community dying from silicone injection syndrome just a year prior to Jack's death. So Peter Dovak was a 30-year-old graphic designer living in Washington, D.C. with his partner of 12 years, Robert Waltman. In an interview, Robert stated that Peter suffered from body dysmorphia and hated how scrawny he looked. And like Dylan, Peter started out as a slim, 140-pound man, and over the next several years, documented his transformation on Tumblr. He slowly ballooned up to a 240-pound muscle bear, and he was open about use of steroids to achieve his desired size and talked about his new desire to grow his genitals through silicone injections, stating on his blog, "To me, it's not enough to be fat. I dream of being on the cusp of immobility, forced to take slow, plodding, and thunderous steps wherever I go. It's not enough to have a big dick. I dream of a package so big I could barely walk, with the shaft as thick as a can of paint and balls so big and pendulous they hang down to my knees like beach balls." It was after posting this about his desire for injections that Peter allegedly began to message Dylan about where to find someone willing to do it. Dylan allegedly directed Peter to a man named Joe Cotter, the manager of a service department who had no sort of medical credentials, but did have the hookup on black market silicone. So starting in January of 2017, Peter paid Joe $1,200 to inject 100 cc's of liquid silicone into the shaft of his penis and another 200 cc's into his testicles.
Allegedly, right?
No, he did this. Well, Dylan allegedly told him where to find the dude, but this man Joe really did inject Peter, because Joe plays a part in it too. So Joe injected Peter with combined 300 cc's of silicone. 2 months later, he went back for another round of injections, and 2 months after that, he went back for a third round of the same injections. In total, Peter spent $3,600 to have 1,250 cc's of silicone injected into his penis and testicles, which is over a liter of silicone in his genitals. Now, Peter's partner actually described how horrifying Peter's genitals look, stating, "The shaft of his penis had swallowed up the head of his penis and looked like a contorted and mangled mass of flesh," and he described how his balls no longer had any sort of softness or flexibility and was nothing more than a solid and cold tumor the size of a cantaloupe in his testicles.
And I mean, does your penis work when it's pumped up on silicone?
You can't have sex. You can't get hard anymore. Reading up on it, I didn't have it in here, but if you inject it too much, no, you can't have sex anymore. It can't get hard. But that is a little graphic here. That is also a fetish because people who do that like men to have sex with their enlarged penis. And I have seen pictures researching this case of what it looks like, and it is, to me personally, horrifying to look at. But this wasn't enough to stop Peter, and in November of 2017, he went back to Joe for a fourth round of injections. However, during this session, Joe ended up accidentally puncturing Peter's vein and proceeded to inject 100 cc's of liquid silicone directly into his bloodstream, and traveled through Peter's bloodstream and ended up in his lungs, where he developed an embolism and fell into a coma at the hospital. Over the next 4 days, his condition grew worse before doctors finally told his partner, Robert, that Peter was now brain dead, and Robert had to make the difficult decision to pull the plug and allow Peter to die on November 15th, 2017. Now, following Peter's death, Robert began to investigate the silicone community and attempt to track down Joe. Now, he knew Joe frequented a website called siliconebeat.com, which was dedicated to people looking for illegal injections. However, he found that just days after Peter's death, the website was taken down, as well as multiple blogs and profiles dedicated to illegal silicone injections, and he would tell reporters, "The silicone community is so incestuous. Every forum and public page dedicated to it was taken down following Peter's death to keep the police from finding them." Police began to try and track down Joe to arrest and charge him with manslaughter. However, in the summer of 2018, right before they were about to arrest him, Joe committed suicide. So that would be the first 2 of 3 deaths related to illegal silicone injections that would all allegedly be connected by only one thing: Dylan Hafertepen. Now, Dylan himself stated in his own blog that the day following Peter's death, free silicone is a very dangerous thing to have in your body. The risk is extremely high, and a misplaced injection almost always results in death. I no longer share information about silicone injections since I have had friends die from it. I cannot in good conscience share the information. Now, following Jack's death a year after Peter's partner Robert posted a statement saying, I have zero sympathy for all parties involved. If my partner's death wasn't enough to warn them, they got what was coming to them. If there were any justice in this world, Dylan would be heading to prison. And now, I do feel like that is a very harsh statement towards Jack.
Very harsh statement towards Jack.
I understand where he's coming from a place of hurt. And on the outside looking in, it is very easy to be like, he knew this one dude was associated with Dylan and he died, and yet he still continued with the injections, like yada yada, it's his fault. However, at the same time, if the abuse allegations are true regarding Dylan and Jack's relationship, it becomes easier to see how Jack may have potentially been gaslighted to undergo the procedure, allegedly. But one thing is clear, though, that on at least one occasion, Jack tried to break things off with Dylan, and he was fully aware of at least some potential danger from his relationship with him. In a message sent to a friend on December 6, 2016, Jack stated, "Keep it to yourself, but for my own sake, I need to develop an exit strategy. It's a little scary because I don't know too many people or have a lot of savings." And Jack admitted that he did move to America for Dylan, and that only people he knew besides him were the other pups of Dylan's in the house, and he knew if he broke things off with Dylan, he would not be allowed to talk to any of them.
And that's part of that contract. You separate the person off from everybody else so that they rely solely on you, and you have complete control of them.
Isolation, yeah, it's one of the biggest, this isn't allegedly, it's one of the biggest abuse tactics is you isolate the victim from their families.
And then they have nowhere to go. That's why it's such a red flag. When anybody tries to separate you from your friends or family, that is a huge red flag.
However, in March of 2017, Jack finally did find the courage to leave when Dylan left for a trip to Japan. Jack called a friend of his to come pick him up in the middle of the night as he stood out on the street with nothing but the clothes on his back since he had given everything else to Dylan. For several months, Jack lived with his friend and his partner, and they tried to show him that there was more to the world than just Dylan, often taking him out to clubs and on hikes, and finally letting him do what he wanted without having to ask for permission. Now, the couple had actually been friends with Dylan and Jack for several years at this point, and during that whole time, both would state that they agreed that Jack just seemed sad and anxious anytime he was around Dylan. The couple also stated that Jack was always in trouble for some reason or another with Dylan for things as small as Jack not asking permission to use the restroom one time when the group went out to bowl. Several weeks after moving in with his friend, Jack also had the padlock collar removed from around his neck by going to Home Depot and having it cut off with bolt cutters. And during this time, Dylan actually seemed to respect Jack's wishes to cut things off, and he wished him nothing but the best on his public blog. However, behind the scenes was a very much different story. Jack mentioned to a friend over Facebook messages that, "I received my limit of what I could take. He was emotionally abusive, constantly making me feel awful. There wasn't enough room for me to have my own friends or my own ambitions. He threatened to sue me and take me to small claims court to prevent me from ever saying anything negative about our relationship." So to explain this being taken to court thing, Jack stated that for the first few months he lived in America, following his move from Australia, Dylan offered to cover all of Jack's expenses while he looked for a job. However, after they broke up, Dylan began to tell Jack that he owed him back rent and needed to reimburse him for all the gifts and items he had bought for him during the relationship. He began to post on his blog how Jack cheated on him and left Dylan with his debt. So Dylan took Jack to small claims court and sued him for about $4,700 in back rent. However, Jack was fully aware that the case was not about money. Dylan worked as a web designer and he made $200,000 annually plus bonuses every quarter. Meanwhile, at this point, Jack was homeless and had only about $3,000 in savings. So it was very much not about the money and everything about trying to make Jack's life as difficult as he possibly could. But still, Jack was told he had to appear in court on September 14th, 2017 to face a hearing for the charges, and Dylan continued to post on his blog about how he was just trying to do the right thing and get the money back that he was owed, yada yada. And during this time, friends stated that Jack was a wreck and distraught during this time, and eventually he reached out to Dylan about settling things, to which Dylan agreed. And within 2 weeks of this, Jack had moved out of the house he was staying at with friends and back in with Dylan. The next day, those same friends, as well as multiple other people, found themselves unfriended and blocked by Jack. After several weeks of no contact, Jack re-added all of his friends. However, according to all of them, he was a different person and something had happened to him during the blackout period. To the friend he confessed all the relationship trouble to, he sent a follow-up message saying, "Everything I said was more than just spite. They were malicious lies with the intention to hurt both him and his reputation. Master Dylan has done nothing wrong except for making the mistake of trusting me, and for that I am most sorry to you and to him." Now, following this, Dylan continued to post on his blog, again to 3 million people, that Jack had spent their breakup spreading hurtful lies about him, and he even assigned a trust scale from 1 to 10 to show how much he trusted Jack on a weekly basis, with the scale never going higher than a 3 all the way up until Jack's death. All of Jack's friends and the Kink community at large felt this was nothing more than an attempt to humiliate Jack further. Now, as I said at the beginning of the episode, Jack had fallen ill about a week before his death, and he was having trouble breathing. He was in the hospital for about a week before he passed away, yet none of his friends or family were made aware of this and weren't even made aware of his death until they found the proof themselves. And what I mean about that is during that week he was in the hospital, rumors began to circulate online that Jack's employers had sent out an email to his coworkers announcing his death, but neither of Dylan's profile nor Jack's made any mention of this. So on October 16th, a friend of Jack's actually messaged Dylan to ask about the rumors, and Dylan stated, "That's horrible. Who is saying this? It sounds like gossip. Tank is rather upset over this." Now, when that friend sent over the copy of the email Jack's work had sent out announcing his death, he found himself blocked. It would be an hour later that Chuck would officially announce Jack's death on Facebook. So Dylan or somebody was pretending to be Jack as if he was still alive until he was confronted with undeniable proof that he had passed away. Following Jack's death, again from a pulmonary embolism and silicone injection syndrome, which basically meant the doctors think he was injected with the silicone, it caused an infection to spread, which landed into his lungs, and one thing led to another, and it just horrible tragedy. But now, following Jack's death, Dylan began to receive major backlash from the online community, with many calling him a murderer and blaming him for the deaths of 3 people. As a result, Dylan quickly deleted his blog and Instagram account, and in their place, he made a website dedicated to Jack and their happy memories together. Linda Chapman has gone on to sue Dylan and publicly blames him for her son's death. He never contacted her about Jack being in the hospital and only agreed to fly to Australia to return his ashes after public backlash. She states that Jack was forced to make Dylan the benefactor to his will, which included a $200,000 policy that Dylan now claims. Sadly, the case against Dylan was dismissed, and as of today, the Seattle Police Department have stated that there is no criminal investigation at this time. Despite there not being an investigation, the public and online consensus is very clear. Dylan almost completely disappeared off the internet due to the intense backlash he received, and as of today, his whereabouts and movements are not publicly known as he maintains a pretty low profile, along with the surviving members of his pups. he remains a hotly debated topic in the queer kink community, and to many, he's a dark spot on their history that will never go away. And that is the case of the sad and really bizarre death of Jack Chapman, aka Pup Tank. And that's just it's one of those cases that is just, you don't really hear about, and it offers a dark inside look at a lot of unique fetish communities within the queer community. But that's not to say, that's not, again, demonizing or stigmatizing anyone. And I think this is really just a good example of being able to talk about communities, because, of course, outside people are going to look at this and be like, oh, that's what this whole community is about, yada, yada, when in fact it's not. And this is just an example of everything not to do in any of these communities. Most of these people are not hurting anyone. They're perfectly fine and healthy relationships and dynamics. And so this is honestly acts kind of like a cautionary tale. And at the same time, it is a good look at potential, again, allegedly. Hate to keep saying that, but again, I don't want to get sued. But, potential abuse tactics and stuff like that people may try to use to isolate you from your friends and your family. And so it is a very touchy and unique set of circumstances and topics to cover. However, at the same time, I think it's a very important subject to cover and talk about. And again, there's nothing against any of the communities that we talked about, like the puppy play community or the body modification community or stuff like that. This case was just an example of those extremes taken a really, really far, a bit further than what is normally you would expect.
I mean, you can have an abusive relationship in any relationship. It doesn't have to have anything to do with a fetish or anything like that. You can have a person that takes things too far in a controlling way that tries to control your life and everything like that. And it leads down usually to a bad path for the person that is the victim of it.
Exactly. And that's kind of what it is like, you'll see a lot of people try to use this case to demonize a lot of these communities when it's the furthest thing from the truth. All these communities don't want nothing to do with Dylan Haffertepen or anything he's associated with. And as far as I've seen online in the little pockets of the gay community I'm a part of, there is an extreme hatred for that man. So, again, really fascinating, really tragic case, but it does offer a little glimpse inside these communities. I'm glad I got to talk about the communities and the normalcy of it, like how normal most of them are. And then this was just an extreme example of it. And with that, thank you guys again so much for tuning in for another week. If you enjoyed the episode, please leave us a 5-star rating or review on iTunes or Spotify. Helps us out a lot, helps other people discover the podcast, and we just love hearing from you guys. If you want to see photos from this case, you can follow us on Instagram at beerswithqueerspod or on Facebook at Beers with Queers, a true crime podcast. And until Monday, stay dangerous out there, my friend.
See you soon.
Bye.